I slept at probably 4 hours a night for the last 6 months before it happened, just trying to get everything working. Am I really going to be able to retire after, 30 years of, this hard job? And then do I want to? I don't know anything else except Sonic since I was 9 years old. Actually, it's also a challenge. On the day you sell, it's a relief, it's an exhilaration, it's exciting, but then it's also, who am I? I had to get the credibility myself to have the confidence to tell people what I actually did, because I didn't think we ever were doing it right. So I'm very fortunate in that my dad taught me you have to go where the opportunity is, and you can't be held up by whatever kind of personal things are holding you back. The only difference in a bad Sonic and a good Sonic is a manager. Like every bad Sonic is one manager away from being a good Sonic. And so I knew when I went in to manage my first Sonic that if I worked really hard and was the absolute best manager I could be, that I could make that Sonic successful.
All right, welcome to the first episode of the Franchise Empire Show. So I wanted to bring on a heavy hitter for episode 1. So we are about to dive into the mind of Paul Reiser. So he was the president of his ownership group, which grew to 38 Sonic drive-through locations. Here's the cool part. They also own the land and the buildings, making his franchise empire significantly more valuable than if it was just the franchise. Did you even know that was a strategy? So we're going to talk about that in this episode and how he and his business partners had a massive exit and sold their entire franchise empire to a private equity company. And he was able to accomplish the dream of building a huge business, selling it, and then riding off into the sunset. Now, if you want to buy a franchise in the next 12 months, you should check out my free franchise masterclass at franchiseempire.com/masterclass. And if you want to work with me and my team on finding or buying a franchise or resale business, then you can go to franchiseempire.com/check territory, and you can schedule a free call to see what's available in your area. The link is also in the description below. All right, with that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Franchise Empire Show. They say Rome wasn't built in a day, and building your empire doesn't happen overnight. My name is Tariq Johnson, and owning franchises is what helped me go from employee to employer and start building my empire for my family. So this podcast is for you, the empire builders. For those of you who want to build something that stands the test of time. This is for those of you who are crazy enough to believe that you can make the dream in your head come to life. This podcast is all about bringing you real people who are building real empires so you can get inside their mind and heart and get proven strategies and actionable insights that will catapult you to build, grow, and scale your empire. Incredibly excited for our guest today. We have Paul Reiser, who, when we talk about a franchise empire, Paul and his business partners owned 38 Sonic locations, which is just insane. So, Paul, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for calling me insane, Tariq. I like it. You know me.
Yeah. And as you can tell already, this is going to be an entertaining one to say the least. And Paul's got some swag. I'll tell you, he's got a YouTube channel out there. So go follow Paul's YouTube channel. For a while, he called it, I think, the Sonic Guy, right? When you owned it.
Started at the Sonic Guy when I was in the Sonics, and then Sonic always didn't know exactly what to think about that, but they kind of gave me some space. Then I changed it to Business Real, REAL. But now, if you want to go to the YouTube and look me up, just put Paul Reiser Business, and my incredible knowledge on video and dad jokes will pop right up in your feed.
And his videos are great quality, really, really good quality, and really entertaining as well. So yeah, definitely go check him out. But cool. So Paul, just to start, tell us a little bit about, kind of your experience in franchising, what you wind up building, how you wind up selling, kind of a little bit about that, and then we'll kind of pivot back into how you got there.
Well, it is interesting because we were able to grow our business to 38 Sonic franchises. We own the land, building, and of course the franchise. It was a family business, 5 of us partners. And after 45 years, we sold it a year and a half ago. We sold the entire package, all the business, land and building in one big package. And it was very successful. And we were able to retire 5 family members successfully at a ripe young age.
That's so cool. So I want to unpack the selling part a little bit, because I feel like most entrepreneurs like lay at bed thinking, wow, one day it'd be so cool to have someone, buy my business and be able to go off and retire into the sunset. Like that's the dream, right? For a lot of people. Right. So what was that moment like when the deal was done, and, how many years were you in the business?
So my dad started as a franchisee in 1977. So we were in the business for 45 years. When I took over as president, and when I left, wandered about, did the prodigal son deal for a while. When I came back, and my brother and sisters and I started the company, a management company, in 2001. That's when I became president. And we were able to grow from 13 to 38 Sonics over the next 10 years, working together as a team. So yeah. So I was really in it for 30 years that I was running it, but I was in it for 45 years because I was car hopping when I was 9 years old. We're that family that you see the guy owns the place and the husband and wife are in there and all the kids are like cleaning tables. And so I was car hopping when I was 12. I made really good tips. I was a cute kid. So, and luckily in the early 80s, labor laws were a lot more lax back then. So
yeah,
my dad, Merlin, never went to jail for that one.
So what was that like then? So after 30 years, you sell this massive empire, right, and all of a sudden you're like looking at, your bank account and going, wow, I'm retired. We sold to a private equity company. What was that feeling like to have realized that dream after 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears?
It was remarkable, Tariq. It was everything I hoped it would be. It's a really fine line you walk, because you should start your business on day one planning to sell it, but you don't want to plan to sell it. It's a really fine line. You want to set it up in such a way that it's easy to sell, where it doesn't depend on you in the long run. But you've got to be all in 100%, but you also have to have an exit strategy. So about 15 years ago, we said we need an exit strategy. They call it the big bus plan, or if somebody gets hit by a big bus. So we said we have to set it up to where we can sell it. And we can talk about that later. But that last year, it was 363 days from the day we put it on the market to the day we closed the sale. Wow. It was a long, difficult process because, it's 41 separate companies. When you look at the real estate was in a couple of companies. Each franchise was an individual LLC. And there's a lot of due diligence to get that covered. So selling it was as hard as building it, seemed like. But it was also exhilarating because you see all these people that are actually evaluating your company more than you ever thought growing up, that flipping hamburgers, you would ever make this much money. And so it was exhilarating. It was scary. Is this really going to happen? You didn't sleep at night. I mean, I slept at probably 4 hours a night for the last 6 months before it happened, just trying to get everything working. We had 25 offers. So whittling that down to 10 and then to 3 and then to 1 and then negotiations. Every day you're like, is this really going to happen? I mean, am I really going to be able to retire after, 30 years of, this hard job? And then do I want to? I don't know anything else except Sonic since I was 9 years old. I had a lot of different jobs. Basically, Sonic was our identity. If you look, I'm in my office, I still have all my Sonic paraphernalia. If you're watching this on YouTube, I've got Sonic stuff everywhere because it's our life. So you really, actually, it's also a challenge on the day you sell. It's a relief. It's an exhilaration. It's exciting, but then it's also, who am I? I've been the Sonic guy for 30 years. So who am I now? So now you begin a new transition, which is exciting as well.
So our team have looked into a few hundred franchises and put together a list of 5 low-cost franchises that all make $1 million or more and that have a proven track record of both happy and profitable franchisees. So if you have a net worth of at least $150,000 and you want to see if the territory that you want is still available for any of these franchises, then you can go to franchiseempire.com/check territory. All right, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a really challenging kind of identity shift and change. And I feel like, folks who maybe are making the corporate transition can kind of relate in some way to that, right? Because it's like their identity is so tied up in, being successful in the corporate arena, and then they're buying a franchise and maybe starting at the bottom again. And when we bought our first juice and smoothie franchise, I joke, but out of seriousness, I washed more dishes in that first 6 months than I ever had in the entirety of my life.
Yeah, that's good. Good for you. No wonder you were successful.
Well, and I think that's it goes to an interesting point for you, Paul, which is, through watching some of your videos on YouTube, like your staff and your team knew who you were when you walked in the door. So like, even though you had 38 locations, it didn't appear that you were just like sitting up in your ivory tower, right? Like you were there, like you're connecting with the team and stuff like that. Like they knew who you were. It seemed like there was a really unique respect there that I don't know that I've seen often in the food business overall. So like, what was that like, and how often did you visit the stores, and how are you able to build such great rapport and relationship with your team?
Well, no, thank you. So I'm always confused if we did it right, but I think we did do it right, because, and I don't want to brag except for to give some credibility to what I'm about to say, because I think it can be helpful. Sonic rates their people as franchisees as small, medium, large, and biggest. Okay, so if you have more than 30 franchises, you're the large category. So we were in the largest category with 38 Sonics. There's probably 360 franchisees. 30 of them have more than 30 Sonics. And in that top 30, we were consistently in the top 10 as far as they rank us on KPIs. But Sonic puts out a balanced scorecard every month, and we were in the top 10. And we actually got up to number 3 at one point. Our sales were about 30% higher than average. Most of the time, we were at least a $200,000 to $300,000 a year average unit volume higher. So I just want to, and then when we sold for more probably per unit than had ever been sold at Sonic. And a lot of that was to do with the timing and why we sold it, because of the timing. But all that to say is when I tell you, I had to get the credibility myself to have the confidence to tell people what I actually did, because I didn't think we ever were doing it right. We were always flying by the seat of our pants, in my opinion. So when I'm in these Sonics and you read the books and the people always say, work on your business, not in your business. And I'm like, well, I don't know. 8 out of 10 businesses go out of business. And yet we've been thriving for 45 years. And I think it has to do with the way I wasn't hands-on cooking hamburgers, at least the last 15 years. I mean, if I went in the kitchen, they would say, oh, Lord, what's Mr. Paul doing in the kitchen? But we did do constant leadership training. So I had a manager meeting every month where all the managers would come and Louisiana managers would come to my Louisiana office. We'd have a meeting. And then the next month we would go to Alabama. All my Alabama managers would come to the office and we'd have a meeting. And then we would visit stores. So how often do I visit stores? I see all my managers at least once every other month. See all my assistant managers at least once every other month. Everyone else, it's hit and miss. So I might go into Sonic in Bossier City, once a month. But it might be a year before I get to Marianna, Florida to see that inside that store. But we have supervisors that are in there every week. We have, anyway. So, but me personally, I know the managers on a very personal note because we meet every month and we've done a lot of leadership, and my managers have been around for 15 years on average. So,
you said a couple of really interesting things there, which is that you felt like you were flying by the seat of your pants, right? Often. and the whole concept of that you felt like you were doing it wrong. And at least for me, I felt like I could relate so much when you just said that, Paul. It was like, oh, wow, because often right now in the business that I'm building and the YouTube and the online business, I often feel like that, like that I'm flying by the seat of my pants. But then when I look back a year from a year ago, it's like, oh, okay, we've been growing. Things are different. And so I just think that's so interesting that for someone like yourself that built such an empire at such that magnitude, you still felt like that as well and were able to build something so successful. So I guess in a way that can give peace to folks that are listening, building a business, thinking it's okay if it feels out of control, as long as you keep putting one foot, ahead of the other, right?
And that's a scary thing too. I mean, misery loves company, right? So if I think I'm doing it wrong, I must be doing it right, because Paul thought he was doing it wrong. But there are some principles. I thought we were doing it right, but I didn't have the confidence to tell people we were doing it right, because so many management books and things you read tell you different things. But the cool thing is the most successful Sonic managers I know that are Sonic franchisees, they were doing it the way I was doing it. They really cared about their people. They were really engaged in their business. And we were always focusing on how do we pay our people. That's the first thing that every time I would have a meeting with somebody, we would talk a while. They say, how do you bonus? How do you bonus your people? And that's the most important thing.
Interesting. So how did you bonus your people, if you don't mind sharing?
So I really feel like the way to grow your business is to have a bonus system that's easy to understand, and that is having your people focus on criteria that grow sales and grow profit. You have to be really careful, because a lot of people will say, oh, we're really going to focus on profit. And then they start not repairing equipment. You save a little money. I don't want to put that on my P&L this month, so I'm not going to fix that steamer. Well, if the other steamer goes out next month, then you can't sell a Coney. I'm gonna let my yard maintenance go a little bit. I'm going to let, and so when you start saving money so you can make money, you're actually, your facilities start to deteriorate. You're not paying your people enough. Your sales start to fall. So you might be getting a bigger percentage, but you're getting a bigger percentage of a shrinking pie. And I would much rather have a solid sized percentage, but of a growing pie. So we had 5 criteria. 3 of them focused on growing sales. 2 of them focused on maintaining profit. And you could get up to 5% of your profit per criteria. So a manager could make 25% of the bottom line each and every month, or they might make 0. If they made 0, though, I can't afford them because they're not making me any money. My managers that made the most money obviously made me the most money. And they appreciated that. They knew every month, they're like, okay, I got to watch my labor. I got to watch my food costs. I got to watch my mystery shops. They knew exactly what they needed to focus on. They knew exactly what their scores needed to be. And if they did that, their sales and profit would grow and they would get nice bonuses.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, to be able to, as a store manager, to be able to capture up to 25% of the profits, that's incredible. That's really amazing.
Yeah. My managers were they averaged probably about 60,000, but I had several making 75 to 105,000 managing a Sonic drive-in.
Wow.
My supervisors made significantly more than that.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It was all based on their performance. Their salary was very low.
Yeah. So, okay. So, and this is more of a technical question out of my curiosity, but you mentioned that, okay, each location had its own, LLC. So then how is it structured from there? Were all of those LLCs then owned by like one holding company?
Right. So when we decided to do it, initially there was different ownerships. I owned half of a couple of Sonics. I had sisters and brothers that owned half. My dad had some other partners. So we agreed to take over as the management company that managed all these Sonics. I said, we have to manage all these Sonics like we own them all ourselves. So we need each Sonic would pay a management fee each month. and that would come in to pay our business expense, the corporate salaries, and all that sort of thing, which were low. We were all made exactly the same and not that much. But the idea was we would charge everybody a little management fee, and then we would run them all like we owned them all 100% ourselves. When I say we all, like me and my 4 partners. So, yeah, we ran it. Each Sonic, I would, if I trained a manager in this store that I owned half of, but I needed him in another store that I only owned 20% of, he would go to that store. There was you couldn't pick and choose. It was, you're running the whole business like you owned 100% of each store. That's the way we ran it.
Wow. That's pretty cool. And that makes sense. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
And the reason we did it, like I said, so you have an LLC that's owned half by me and half by my dad. You have another LLC that's owned by my dad and 2 other partners. You have an LLC that's owned by my sister and my dad. So the last 25 or so were just even. Once we kind of took over, they became to where we owned them all 20% each, and then divided by the real estate. So the same way.
Hey, so if you want to figure out if you should buy a franchise and learn the fastest and easiest way to figuring out the best franchise to buy and everything you need to know about the process, then you'll want to go get access to our Franchise Buyers Academy. In our Franchise Buyers Academy, you'll get a behind-the-scenes look into specific franchises and exactly how much money they are making. You'll get simple formulas for finding money-making franchises and a blueprint on how to scale them into a franchise empire that can be sold for a lot of money later on. You'll be able to finally answer the question on, should I buy a franchise? Now you can get access at franchiseempire.com/FBA. Now let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into the real estate side of things. So, you mentioned that you guys owned a ton of real estate on where the locations were based off of, which is, probably very normal for you because that was the world you lived in. But for the average person looking to buy a franchise that's not super familiar with franchising overall, or that maybe has 1 or 2 locations of something, I don't think it's a concept that they're, 1, incredibly familiar with, 2, that they go out with a specific intentionality to build their business in that way. So just to start out, before we kind of go into the deeper technical side of it, can you talk about kind of what the benefits are really to owning the real estate on which your locations are operating?
Right. I'm glad you went to that, because I'm afraid, I know a lot of people listen to you because they're interested in getting into franchise, and we jumped into some kind of deep stuff early on. And so I do want to definitely give value to people who are just thinking about getting into a franchise. Because how you start and running one is a whole lot different than how you run 38. So, it depends on the franchisee, the franchisor, whether you can even own the real estate. You get into McDonald's corporate owns the real estate, you own the franchise, the business. People need to understand the difference in when you become a franchisee. Franchises usually have company-owned stores and franchise-owned stores. So the franchisor, like Sonic, owns 38 or 360 maybe Sonics that are owned by the corporate. Those are corporate stores. And then there's another 3,000 that are owned by franchisees. So when I own a franchise, I own that business. It's my business. And a lot of people think that the franchise is kind of your boss, or the franchise might help you out if you get in a bind. And that doesn't happen. It's your business. You're paying a royalty to the franchise so you can use their sign, their name, their recipes, their marketing, which is awesome. But if you can't pay your note, if you go in the hole, it's your problem. You have to pay that back. Okay. And you get to run the business largely the way you want. But some franchises like Sonic, you can own your real estate. McDonald's, if you get into a Chick-fil-A isn't really technically a franchise. I know you and I have both made videos about that. You don't own the real estate. But if you can own the real estate, then you have to choose, do I want to own the real estate, or do I want to have more cash available to me to open up more franchises? So a lot of people then choose to buy or rent based on how fast they want to expand. And if you have something that thrives in a strip mall, a strip center, it's a lot cheaper to go into a business where you can put it in an end cap in a strip center than to buy your own real estate. So if you're going to put a coffee shop, you might can put it in a strip center and do $300,000 worth of improvements and you're good to go. If you want to buy a piece of property to have that coffee shop, you're going to spend $600,000, $200,000 to $600,000 on the property, another $500,000 on the business. You're $1.5 million before you sell your first cup of coffee. But you can use the equity in that business to borrow against to build more. But we always like to own the business, own the real estate, and we grew pretty slowly because of that. But as we had more and more real estate, we were able to grow faster and faster. Our biggest year, we built 3 Sonics a couple of years in 1 year. So it wasn't really the cash that was slowing us down. It was trying to find a good spot to put a new Sonic was slowing us down more than the cash flow being able to buy the real estate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, it wasn't really until about a little bit over a year ago that I learned about a lot more about the real estate side of things. I was interviewing who's become a friend of mine now, someone named Glenn. He works with Huntington Bank. All he does is SBA loans. And he was telling me how you can finance them over, I think, a 20 or 25 year amortization, which is typically for a business, you can only typically do it for 10, right? So it provides a lot more options when you have double the term in terms of the real estate overall. And I know it's popular in the daycare model. So in childcare, it's a very, very common for you to go in and buy the real estate and then build your daycare, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, because you're probably not going to build a bunch. You're probably going to grow slowly in the daycare business.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I don't think you really see people owning 30 daycares or, Primroses or Goddards, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So
and let me go in just a little deeper. What you asked me, what's the advantage or why would you do that? So let's say I'm going to get in my first franchise. Well, if you're going to buy the real estate, like you said, you might get a 10-year amortization, which means the bank says you got to pay it off in 10 years. So we would usually get ours on a 12. Well, we'd get the real estate on 15, the equipment on 7, because you can't buy equipment on more than a 7-year note. And then that would be blended to a 12-year note. Okay.
Interesting.
So say we spent $1 million on a real estate, on a Sonic, just to make it a nice even number, because we spent a lot more than that from the last 20 of them. But, the bank says, okay, well, you have to come up with, 20% down usually, or an amount of equity in another building you can lean up against it. So you have to come up with 20% down, but then you still owe $800,000 on that building. So if you get that business up and running and then you don't like it and you want to leave or you go out of business, you still owe that $800,000. So you either need to lease that building back out or you need to sell it. Either way, you're stuck paying that note back. So when you buy the building, you're putting yourself into a much bigger, possibly financial bind. But however, if you do pay it off, you can start collecting rent down the road. And along the way, you can do a lot of tax advantages by owning it and depreciating it. Contrast that with renting. So say I want to get into a business and I don't have a ton of money up front, but I think it's a great business. Well, you can lease that space and you're making money off the business and you're not stuck with a note. You're stuck with a 5-year lease, say. So if into 5 years, you can walk away from that thing if it doesn't work out. Into 5 years, you cannot walk away from a building you spend $1 million on. So. Yeah,
it's a good, a really good point. And rent's getting expensive these days too.
It is.
It's
I was building a building
there. I'm sure. Cool. And then so a lot of so you were in the food business, right? And the fact that your dad had started this this empire, and then you guys took it and ran and really scaled it up into something much bigger and multiplied it. What was that like overall being in the food business, in the sense that a common thing that's set out there is that, hey, the food business is a low margin or low profit margin business. Was there at any point where you guys thought about ever pivoting out of just doing the Sonics and going into like other businesses? And if not, why? And why did you decide to continue to expand?
So it makes a lot of sense to pivot into another business when you get into something like a Sonic or something that's a large franchise, and you can only put so many in an area. And so, once you've completely penetrated your market with your brand, now if you don't want to go off somewhere far away to start building more of them, it makes a good sense to all of a sudden now I go into a chicken or something different that I can fill in the spots in between. But what we had a good system. We had a lot of people trained in place that knew how to run Sonics. We had all our software, everything was focused towards Sonic. So it was a lot easier for us to build a new Sonic and take a manager that already knew how to run a Sonic. So it made sense for us just to continue to expand out Sonic. But eventually you're like, well, there's no more I can put here. So you go to Sonic. And the great thing about a franchise is, where is a good place to expand? And they say, well, South Louisiana, South Alabama is a good area. They gave us a few others that were really far away. So we decided to move to South Alabama, and we kind of started all over many years ago. Man, I lost track of your question. I need to start answering your questions faster. How did that start? You said, I should have got into, should I start doing oil change places? So I'm not all just stuck with food. And is food low margin? Food's lower margin than people think it is. People are like, man, I know it doesn't cost you $4 to make that hamburger. You're making a killing, and you see how busy it is. But there's also a lot of overhead and a lot of labor involved in food. So it's a thin margin. Full service restaurants, I think, average, 2 to 10%, like around 4% profit. Fast food's going to average closer to 10%. And it's gotten harder and harder lately. So 10%, and say the average restaurant does I don't know what the average does. The average doesn't do that much. But let's say you do 10% on $1 million, and you've got 100,000. Not that many restaurants actually do $1 million. So you're probably making $60,000 to $100,000 in profit on that store for working your 80 hours a week. So it is a challenge, and it's like, man, that's a lot of work for $80,000. But what happens is the multiplier of when you start building the next one and the next one and the next one. And then if you start paying them off and you start to collect some rent, then you begin to have some large volume. And then you get a couple of $2 million stores and a $3 million store. So there isn't that much money in one. It would be a real challenge to try to, live really, really well off of one fast food restaurant. But once you get 5 or 6, then you're doing pretty good. Or you're getting killed.
How are you getting killed? It's interesting how many people get kind of sucked into the idea or the allure of franchising through food. It's like so many people look, and that's kind of what franchising, that's the image that comes to mind. When I think the average person thinks about franchising, which is interesting. Overall, I had a guy actually that was just DMing me on Instagram saying that he's coming to the U.S. on a visa, and he's looking for a franchise, and was asking me, hey, should I do food? Is it and I'm like, well, you could, but it is lower margin, and you would really need multiple in order to probably realize the income that you'd want to make. But obviously there are folks like you and others that have gone out and done it at a large scale overall. I want to pivot the conversation to, outside of the technical and strategic side of things, what do you think was the biggest mindset or belief system that you adopted over your years of entrepreneurship? And how did that wind up benefiting you?
Well, very fortunate, because my dad, he had a million different jobs. He was poor. He was number 7 of 8 kids, lived in a one bedroom little teeny house in Wichita, Kansas. And his mindset was, I'm going to get out of this by starting a business. So he always sold candy out of his locker. So did whatever he needed to do, you know. So when we got into Sonic, he bought 25% of his first Sonic with some insurance money that my mom got from getting in a car wreck and almost getting killed. So we took that $6,000 and moved across the country from Wichita, Kansas, or from Hutchinson, Kansas to Monroe, Louisiana, because that's where the opportunity was. So I'm very fortunate in that my dad taught me you have to go where the opportunity is, and you can't be held up by whatever kind of personal things are holding you back, you know? So, and also the mindset of this is going to work. Now it didn't always work. We had 3 Sonics that we just poured money into. We poured money into Alabama for years before money came out. So it doesn't always work, and that's a challenge. So we were fortunate that a lot of them did. And we also had the mindset, I really had a burn the boats kind of mindset, which probably, I don't know if I could recommend that. But again, so the philosophy that I adopted was, this is going to work. I've seen it work. That's the great thing about a franchise model. The only difference in a bad Sonic and a good Sonic is a manager. Like every bad Sonic is one manager away from being a good Sonic, except three wow. that I. But in general, every bad Sonic is one manager away from being a good Sonic. And so I knew when I went in to manage my first Sonic that if I worked really hard and was the absolute best manager I could be, that I could make that Sonic successful. I didn't know that I would be the best manager, but I knew that I was good enough to make it successful. And I was able to really grow that thing really fast. I was very fortunate that my wife understood that just because I was working 80 hours a week didn't mean I didn't love her more than the Sonic. I loved her so much that I was going to make this Sonic successful so I could take care of the family. So anyway, that my mindset was very positive. It was very people-centered, but it was also very success-focused, and just, it will work if I just do the right work. I work hard, but I also had to work smart, blah, blah. But I don't know. It's very interesting, but I think back about that. And my dad showed me, this is how you work. My wife supported me. This is how you work. And fortunately, we partnered with a brand that if you followed the system, it really worked.
And was there ever a moment in that 30 years? I'm sure there were probably many moments where you were like, oh, this is hard. Like maybe I want to do something else or different. But was there one in particular where like you really had to fight it, and like a time where you were like, I'm not sure if I want to do this anymore? Did you ever have a moment like that?
I mean, actually, I had a lot of moments like that. Once you borrow $1 million, though, once you borrow your first $1 million, you're focused, you're committed. And it was a challenge because we were family partners. So when you're frustrated with your family, when times are really hard, when actually there's months you lose money, it's like, what am I doing here? You know, but you can't focus. You have to have a plan going in. You have to know how you're going to react in those situations before you get in the situation. Because if you let your emotions make your decisions, then you're going to make some bad decisions. You have to know, okay, this is the plan. I know it's going to be hard. I tell new managers when I put them in a store, I'm like, look, you can't even think about quitting for the first year. There's 1 year where no matter how bad it gets, don't even think about quitting. It's not an option in your life. And then after a year, let's talk about it. But because that happens, you know, those times will happen. But you have to know going in ahead of time that you're going to, like, no, I'm going to get through this. My dad would tell me one time, he's like, this is tough, Paul. This is a bad one. You know, whether it was a lawsuit or, you know, a computer virus or I don't just so many things that happen, you know, a store that didn't work, or we've had people get killed in Sonics. You know, they upset boyfriend walks in and kills his girlfriend. It's a
in
rough
one of yours
life.
that happened in one of your stores.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
So, horrible things happen. And my dad one time, just a few years ago, he said, this is bad. And I said, Pop, has there ever been a time in 30 years when we haven't had something going on, some challenge. And he's like, nope. I said, what's the last one? He's like, I don't remember. I'm like, I know, because they're just going to keep happening and we're going to keep getting through it. So you can't let this one run us off because we know we're going to get through it.
Man, Paul, I feel like this is such a powerful point because, take it from the beginning of our conversation, like this man just rode off into the sunset, after 30 years and had this massive exit. But, when you really look under the hood and start digging in and you're like, man, we had some crazy stuff happen. It was a hard business and it was crazy and a lot of stress and all these things. And it's just a testament to commitment and sticking to it and fighting through adversity, which is, like the story of entrepreneurship. And so kudos to you, man. Not that you need it or need to hear it, but man, how impressive what you built, what you accomplished, and just the resiliency in terms of your mindset and your spirit to be able to do, what you did over a 30-year period, man. That's just really, really amazing.
It was a big team effort. There's 5 of us. And like I say, my dad building the first one was a lot harder than building the last 10. Taking that first step is the hardest step. It really is.
Yeah. The first is the hardest, right? Right. Just kind of getting it out of the way afterwards. It's not that you become numb to it, but at some point you get used to like the fear, the uncertainty, right?
Well, you build up resilience. You build up your muscles for it. It's a lot different running one store than running 38. But each one helps you go to the next one. I'm afraid it sounds like we're wrapping up and some people might be leaving. Don't leave, especially if you're thinking about getting into franchise. I don't know what questions you're going to ask me. If you're going to ask me any more operational questions, but I think, 8 out of 10 businesses close. And that's because, as hard as it is to start, it's even harder to stay open. And so I think it's not just sticking to it, because if Dad would have got into Blockbuster Video, no matter how good my attitude was, we wouldn't have been able to exit Blockbuster very well. So you also have to have your head up and always be aware of where is the business going, what is it doing. That's why we're always evaluating our businesses. Like, what's the value of it right now? Because there was times in the 80s when Dad first got in, Sonics weren't worth much. There was times when I was in it where they were worth 5 times. 5x profit. And then there were times in 2008 where you couldn't give a Sonic away. So we were always watching the valuations. And then all of a sudden in 2020, there was a whole lot of private equity money on the side. And all of a sudden, all these people were wanting to get into business and buy chunks of medium-sized businesses with good, consistent cash flow. So we knew this was the time to sell. But, be careful, because just hard work doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win if you're working hard on something that's about to go out of business.
That's a really that's a really good point. Tony Robbins used to say you can doesn't matter how motivated or ambitious you are, you can run east looking for a sunset. And you're just not going to find it. So strategy, is important. What do you feel like if you had to compress 30 years of success and running that business and dealing with partners and family and buying real estate and staff and all those different components, if you had to compress it to like 2 or 3 kind of core strategic mindsets, not just, before it was like almost like motivational mindsets, right? But like strategic philosophies, I guess. Like, did you have some core 2 to 3?
Right. My career was pretty much 3 stages. So in step 1, everybody says, work on your business, not in your business. But you can't do that until your business is up and running. So on day 1, you have to be prepared to get in there and work whatever it takes. You might have the perfect manager set up, and then you open up and they're crazy, or they steal a deposit, and you have to fire that manager on day 1, and then you're left holding the bag. So realize that when you start, it all depends on you. And if you're planning on getting off at 5 o'clock and the 5 o'clock assistant doesn't show up with a car up, you have to stay till 8 or 9 or 10. So be ready to work whatever it takes to open it up. For me, it was about 5 years of 80-hour weeks. So I missed every fish fry on Saturdays that my family had. You know, anyway, but I'm not saying that to feel sorry for me. I'm just saying I don't know anybody that has been very successful in Sonic or any other business that wasn't willing to say, I can't go to that right now. I love you. I love you so much that I'm going to make this business successful. So go represent me at the fish fry this weekend so I can get these burgers out the door. So realize step one, it is all up to you. But every minute that is beyond when you're actually running a shift, you need to stay extra and train other people to do it well. So first, it all depends on you to run it, but you don't have to run every minute. You have to run your shift 40 hours a week and then stay another 40 training people to do it right when you're not there. Okay. So then hopefully by then you're starting to make some good income. Well, don't put it all in your pocket and go to Cancun yet. Now you start investing in other good people so you can begin to slowly expand. And we slowly expanded at the beginning, and then we were able to quickly expand. But then you invest in people. And then toward the end, what I didn't figure out, my dad told me from day one, he's like, you can't touch every hamburger slick. In other words, he would come in and watch me, and I was everywhere, making sure every burger. And he's like, you've got to train people to do it right. So then once I was able to train people, then hire people, then I said, yeah, it's easy to replace an assistant. Definitely needs to replace himself. Manager needs to replace himself. Supervisor. But then I was the president of the company, and I'm like, well, I forgot the rule number one, replace myself. So then the last part, I finally figured out I needed to replace myself. So I found somebody more experienced than me to come in and take over the business. And that really enabled us to step away, either to sell it or grow it or pivot it. And the biggest problem people have is, if I hire somebody better than me, I'm putting up quote symbols if you're listening to this on a podcast. I have a video about that, as a matter of fact. Hire someone better than you. Then people feel like, I'm going to get replaced or I'm going to get fired. But the most valuable thing you can do is replace yourself, because that gives you the ability then to step back and to do more work. That doesn't mean walk away. And the last thing is always be sure that you are delegating, not abdicating. So the problem that a lot of people run into is, I'm exhausted. I need to get out of here. And you have somebody that's a hard worker. They show up all the time. You give them the keys and say, you're in charge, and you abdicate responsibility. You give it to them and you just walk away without checking up. Delegating means you've trained them properly. Then you give them the keys. Then you check up on them. Then you reinforce. Then you train. Then you encourage. It's a whole lot. But what usually happens is people like, here's the keys. You run it. They come back. It's a mess. They're like, you did a terrible job. Oh my gosh, you're the worst. Either that or they don't say anything, which is even worse. So
wow. That's a huge light bulb for me. Yeah, that's
the only way we were able to sell it, because when we were trying to sell it, everybody wanted me and my brother-in-law, that's our IT guy, to stay on. Like, you guys can stay on for a couple of years. You can keep part of your sale in equity. And I'm like, no, I'm out. But you don't need me because you got Tony, and you have these fantastic properties with great locations. I sold them all on the fact that location's more important than management, and you guys are buying great locations. It's true. You got to have location. But anyway.
Hey, you got to have business savvy, right? Business savvy, and it pays off in the end. Before we wrap up, I do want to hit on this point of what was it like, there you go. What was it like working with partners and family members? There's some people that go, never get into business with your family. It's the worst thing that you could ever do. How are you able to manage that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a well-known slogan. The fastest sinking ship is a partnership. So it is a
Never heard that.
challenge. It is a challenge, really. It's the biggest challenge. It really is. Luckily, mom and dad taught us never to fight, and all my brother-in-law, all my brothers and sisters, we were partners together. There was 5 of us. I'm the youngest of 5. So it was a kind of a gut check. It was psychologically difficult, I know, for my brother, who's 12 years older than me, to be the president, to not be the president. But he realized that we all were different kind of suited. We kind of sat back and everyone had their own unique abilities. Like, obviously, this guy's going to be better at this guy's better at this. Paul's just really good at communicating, and he already has great relationships with the Sonic corporate. So he's the guy that's going to be the president. But what you also have to do is, if you don't have to have partners, I guess don't get partners. It is nice to have somebody that's that you can talk to. You really need peers. You really need people. So if you don't have partners in your business, you need to have peers that own similar businesses that you can talk to. That's real important, because you do need relationships. But if you do have partnerships, just make sure before you ever sign up that you have very clearly written out your different roles and responsibilities. So everyone needs to know what their responsibility is, what their role is, what they're responsible for. And you're like, no, we're best buds. That's never going to be a problem, man. We both work hard. That's great when you're happy and you're going in. It's not great when one guy decides that, I don't think I really want to do this anymore. Well, what are you going to do? Or one guy says, no, I think managers need to be on their schedule. They need to list their schedule. They need to be there when they're supposed to be there. And the other guy says, no, they need to be able to be fluid. Who's going to decide? Right. So one guy's operations, one guy's finance, one guy's whatever. And then you always have to have a tiebreaker. So it's great with us to have 5 partners, because we always had a tiebreaker. But I promise you, no matter how much you think you're never going to fight, you will definitely fight. I mean, brutal fights. And you better have something already in place that's going to decide who breaks all ties, and what happens when someone decides they want to sell, and what happens when someone decides they want to quit, and what happens when somebody wants to buy a new building and somebody doesn't. And those are your challenges. Usually, like, some of us, like, we just wanted to grow, to build. Some of us were like, well, no, we want to pay some of these off and start collecting rent. So what do? You got to have procedures and policies in place to handle all that. But if you have the policies and procedures and you follow them clearly, and you have at least a month, communication, and you have them, then there's basically like, this is what we decided. And so this is what we do. And then it's not all feelings hurt all the time. You walk out of the meeting, you're like, where do you guys want to go to lunch? It can get ugly in the meeting. And then it's like, well, there's the vote. All right, where are we going to lunch?
Yeah. I'm sure that took some practice to be able to just kind of flip this one.
We brought in our accountant to run every meeting for us. It wasn't ever me running family meetings. I ran manager meetings, but I did not run family meetings.
Point to the accountant. He's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Man, that's cool, Paul. So in closing, like, what a piece of advice to someone who's out there, in the process of building their business empire. They have this dream and vision to one day create generational wealth for their family, build an asset that they can sell. What's on your heart in terms of a piece of advice that you feel like they should know?
Don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. It's harder than you ever think it's going to be. That's why 8 out of 10 fail. The secret is, the secret is communication from day one. The biggest trick is, if you think you want to start into business one day, okay, you might have to edit the heck out of this because I'm stammering, but now I know. If you want to get into some type of business, before you go take out a loan and before you turn your life upside down, go work in that business for a little while. You know, people say, I think I want to get into the salad shop. I'm like, go work at a salad shop. Oh, I have a job. I'm like, yeah. So go work nights, go work 3 nights a week. Tell them you're trying to pay off some bills. They'll hire you. I promise you they will hire you right away. And then after you work 3 nights a week for 3 or 4 months, you'll see, do I like this business? Do I see some opportunity? And you'll also be used to working an extra 30 hours a week, because that's what it's going to take to start your own business. Unless you have a ton of money, then you can hire somebody. That's possible, but you still can't just let them run. You have to check up on them a lot. So a lot of people call me and they say, I want to get into a sonic business. There's a great place in my town. I should build one. And when I retire from the fire department, I'll go run it. I'm like, that's not how it works. It's not a hobby. It's not part-time. I don't want to be dissuasive. And then he'll say, well, that's why you got 37. It's so hard. Like, okay, you called me, don't ask my advice. I don't care. So
that's hilarious. That happens all the time. Yeah, people will reach out for advice, tell them the advice, and then they'll do the complete opposite. It's like, well, why'd you even ask?
So don't be afraid to ask for advice. Get a great broker. We got a great deal because we used a great broker. If you're going to franchise, if you want to learn about franchises, I'm sure they can call you, Tariq, and you can give them some advice for free up front. A lot of people say, oh, I don't want to ask because I don't want to be committed. Well, don't commit. It's like you go shopping for a car. We always go on Sundays because we don't want the shopping guy. We don't want the car salesman to come out and bother us. But even if he does, you don't have to buy the car. You don't have to buy a franchise. But look around. Definitely get all your advice from people. And then if you ever, so the next thing you have to do is before you ever start, you better start getting good credit. If you don't have great credit, then you're stuck. And then if you ever get in a situation like when I built my second Sonic, I almost went broke. I finally got up to where I was making $73,000 a year out of one Sonic, and I was rich. Then I built the second Sonic, and it did horrible. And the first Sonic lost a bunch of sales to the new Sonic, and all of a sudden the next year I went to $42,000. So if I wasn't living on a $42,000 income when I had $73,000 coming in, I would have, what would I have done? I'd have been in big trouble.
Hold on. So how did you handle that? Did those two recover? And if so, how did they, and how long did it take?
Well, I had gotten lazy. I'd gotten to where I was only working like 55 hours a week. And so now I'm able to work 80 hours a week again. I'm 40 hours in one, 40 hours in the other, hired the right people, did the marketing. I just knew, I'm like, all right, it's going to be harder than I thought. But
and so those turned around. I mean, because if those are the first two, like they had to do well enough for you to go, let me be crazy enough to then do more.
Well, that was my first two. Dad already had about 10. Actually, my second one was our 13th drive-in. And that was the last one that we built before we started the management company. But no, I'm like, the challenge is most people have income creep. And no matter how much you make, you spend. Where I was like, at that time when I was making $73,000, we were still sleeping on the furniture that my wife had from high school. Still had the same little 13-inch TV that I got in high school. We did not spend any money. So I would recommend living debt-free, having good credit, and no matter how much you make, live on less. There you go. Boom, there's your soundbite.
Yeah, I love it. That was so good, man. Awesome, Paul. Well, thanks for.
People say, "Oh, you old school man. You waiting? Okay, boomer." I've looked. I promise you, I've looked for easy ways. I have not found them. No one I know that's successful has found it an easy way, unless they say they found it an easy. No, I don't know. They're lying, or I haven't figured it out. That's why I didn't have the confidence. But.
Yeah, I mean,
everyone I know that's successful did it the hard way.
100%. I can say very, very confidently and adamantly that those 5 years of running just my 2 stores was difficult, and but I just learned so much and grew so much from it, and then now the business that I've been running for the last couple of years has been even harder because there's no blueprint. There's no blueprint to what I'm doing right now, so it's been even more difficult, and I've had more days than I'd like to admit that I've wanted to throw in the towel and just quit and what am I doing? This is so difficult, and so there is no easy button like Staples has tricked us to believe.
But I do want to be encouraging at the end and say, along the way, I invested in people, and I've had so many people thank me for teaching them how to get out of debt. I've had so many people thank me because they didn't have a high school degree, and yet they're making $75,000 a year, help their mom get out of debt, bought their own house. Along the way, I've helped a lot of folks, and that's where I get a lot of energy. But also along the way, once you get some supervisors in place, you don't have to work 80 hours a week in the store. I mean, I never missed any of my kids' events ever, because you get to work your 75 hours whenever you want. So you go to an event, and then you go back to work. But now I can take my kids all over the world. I went to France for 2 weeks. I go see my daughter in Chicago, my son in Georgia. We go to Florida 3 times a year. I mean, you put in all the energy up front, and then on the back end, the freedom comes a little sooner because I'm still pretty young to get to do all that. Along the way, I might have a call at 5 a.m. that says we got a serious problem. You always have to be linked into that. As long as you have the businesses. That's the craziest thing about selling it. I never get that text at 5 a.m. or 9 p.m. anymore.
I'll make sure to text you at 5 a.m. just to keep you on your game.
It's off, baby. It is off. I'll reply at 6 a.m. when I get up and have my smoothie.
Hey, Paul, the grease trap is backing up, man. It smells horrible.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an inside joke, everyone.
If you got a restaurant, you know about a grease trap.
Oh, the worst. Cool, man. Well, Paul,
I could talk to you all day, but I don't know if all your people want to listen to us all day. But this was super fun, man. I appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk on here, because I know you got a lot more gems to drop. But yeah, man, thanks so much for coming on, and look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Hey, congratulations on the new podcast, on your new YouTube channel. I hope it does just fantastic for you, man. I'm excited to watch these interviews myself.